Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion, and here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Well, Agnes, thank you very, very much on this Tuesday. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're into we've completed the first day of the Republican Convention, and we're kind of gearing up for the second day. And I don't know whether the second day is going to be quite as momentous as the first day, but boy, it was a pip, wasn't it? It was incredible. But anyway, everybody kind of thought that this would be one worth watching, but I don't think anybody really knew what might happen. And of course, the thing with the similarities between Michelle Obama's speech at the convention, Democratic convention in 2008, and Melania Trump's speech last evening, of course, is the big thing. But now the question is, how do we assign blame for that? How does we know that that she's probably not going to end up bearing the brunt of this. The fact of the matter is, however, she basically said at before she spoke that she wrote it. So the more they try to assign blame for this on somebody else, on a speechwriter, the more it's going to raise questions about her veracity. So, but that, again, somebody made a comment in one of the accounts I read this morning, which I thought was pretty well taken, and said, compared to the other things Donald Trump has done and got away with, this is going to be this is a walk in the park for him. So, but anyway, it is just amazing. It's a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday. Today is the 18th day of July in the year 2016, and one of the things that occurred to me after our program yesterday was that we're pretty much moving into the last days of July, the last 10 or 12 days of July. Once we get there and enter August, we will be moving towards the 11th of August, which will be 2 years and 3 years and 6 months that we will have been on the air here at the Virtual Center. I can't believe that. We began on the 11th of March. First program was the 11th of March in 2013. So as of the 11th of August, will be 3 years and 6 months. That to me, that's amazing. And I know, God love him, I know Bob Kincaid's been doing this program and has been managing by hand this network for so long and doing so well, and is so committed to it for better than 10 years. And I find that amazing. As I mentioned yesterday, and I'm not going to go take more time on it today, but I did make reference to the fact yesterday that with the financial stress associated with keeping the Head On Radio Network on the air, the fact that Bob can do 15 hours a week, 5 days a week, 3 hours a night of live broadcasting is pretty remarkable. I think it speaks to his ability and his talent and all of that. I think most of you appreciate, those of you who listen regularly can appreciate the fact that Bob's mind's incredible. And the only thing I hope for and I wait for is that some people who are finding places to invest that don't quite work out as much or as well as they hope they would work out. One of them is going to stumble on to Bob Kincaid and the Head On Radio Network at some point in time. And once that happens, then the stressful part of raising funds on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis will be a thing of the past for Bob. And he can just concentrate on doing his program and making it better and improving the equipment and introducing a lot of new configurations, technological configurations, in order to improve the benefit of the programs that we do have. So again, but I can't say enough about how remarkable that I think Bob is. And the interesting thing is, and I'm going back through living my past here a little bit, But when I first started to do a talk show here in southern West Virginia in the year 2000, it was the year 2000, I was doing a program in the afternoons. And Bob was in doing, I think, filling in for someone. And I asked him if he would substitute for me for a couple of days. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't a vacation because I usually don't do those. But there was some reason that I had to beg off the programs. I was on 5 days a week, every afternoon for 2 hours. And Bob did a program for me for, I think, a week. I think it was a full week. And I became incredibly enamored with his ability and his depth and his wit. And basically, it wasn't too long after that they offered Bob an evening program on the same station. And what had become a friendship at the beginning, developed into, I think, a real admiration on my part for him and his ability. And here we are, many, many years later, 16 years later, and we're still going at it. So anyway, welcome to today's program at the Virtual Center. Our topic, as you know, if you were with us yesterday, has been education and will ultimately be the same today. And of course, those of you who have followed this program regularly over the months and years will recognize that this is a topic that we keep coming back to. It's kind of the topic that probably most challenges me and excites me and gives me hope. And I hope that kind of interest and passion comes through in the programs, because I really do believe, very, very deeply in the things that I feel that I've learned over the years about education. And I just hope that at some point in time we can begin to see many of these things beginning to happen in education reform. And I hope they happen in West Virginia. And that's what this program yesterday was about candidate for governor here in West Virginia, Jim Justice's commitment on his website and in his speeches during the primary to turn education into an economic engine in order to drive the turnaround in West Virginia's economy. And when I heard that and I saw that, and I thought, wow, that in itself, it seems to me, is the most positive, exciting thing. And I don't know. I haven't talked to Mr. Justice. I don't know. I've heard him speak a few times, but I don't know how deep his depth and understanding in education goes. But I'm just hoping that perhaps some of this material, some of this insight that we've been dealing with can help him and benefit him, because if indeed it begins to happen here in West Virginia, it is the only thing I do believe that can actually turn the economy of the state around and really bring opportunity back and make it available to people, not just a few people, but everybody. And I really mean that. So with that, I do solicit your questions, your comments, your suggestions, whatever, on this particular topic as much as any. I really do look forward to and hope that I will hear from some of you. We have a phone number, and that phone number gives you an opportunity to go directly on the air and share your thoughts, not only with me, but most important, with our other listeners. And I think that kind of dialogue and that kind of interaction and conversation is ultimately what we need more of in this day and age. I really believe that. And so our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email, and if you for some reason or other you're reluctant to go on the air, and I can surely understand that, then by all means, I invite you to share an email with me, and I'd be glad to share it with our listeners. And I have one that I received after our programs last week that I want to share with you based on our programs last week. It was based principally on the material we did on Jefferson and Jefferson's Declaration of Independence and the idea of the moral sense and all of that. So I do want to take an opportunity to share that. I meant to do it yesterday, and I had printed a copy of the email because I wanted to share it with you, and I couldn't lay my hands on it yesterday, but I did this morning. And so I want to open with that because it really refers to the programs that we did last week. And then we'll get back to our theme of education, hopefully, and continue. I remind you that since our program on Tuesdays begins 1/2 hour later than it does on Mondays and Wednesdays, we usually forego our break at the top of the hour, and hopefully we'll be able to do that today. And the reason for that break is, if you didn't know, is obviously because of me. And you know, I've reached the point in my life where we're going a full 2 hours without a break in the middle. Doesn't quite work for me. So the break is usually for me. But with the abbreviated program on Tuesdays, I can usually go the full hour and a half, and I hope that we'll be able to do that today. Also, let me remind you of our Facebook page. I haven't put anything on it in the last couple of days, but the material that we're doing on education is material that is on the Facebook page. It's really the last stuff, other than links to particular news items that I'm seeing. The last substantive thing of mine that I put on there was content or copy based on these ideas on education, which I'd like to pursue even further on today's program. Facebook page, for those of you familiar with it, all you need to do is go to the home page, and in the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our page. And I do invite you to take advantage of the opportunities to comment on what's there, because one thing I like to believe in is that when I write something, it's as much as anything else a solicitation for reaction. It's not in any way have I ever written anything that I really believed was the end all of a particular item. I think that hopefully what I'm doing is raising the kinds of issues and the kinds of questions which encourage people to reflect on these things, and then they can apply their minds, their abilities to that particular topic, and hopefully contribute something not only to what I've written, but to my own understanding of a particular topic. Because again, I do believe that the pursuit of truth is a lifelong endeavor. I don't think it ever ends. And in my case, in terms of the information, the things that I write, that's really my intent. I don't intend anything to be the end of a particular story, but hopefully the beginning. And I think those of you who listen regularly will understand exactly what I mean by that. Let me go to the email that I mentioned, which I received this weekend, and it was sent to me after our programs last week when we were dealing with Jefferson, the exchanges between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And you remember we spent quite a bit of time on those. And actually, I'd like to get back to this theme a little bit after we finish this education material, because very honestly, I believe that, and I'll kind of share this with you or restate this. I think I've already said this, but I think this should probably put it into a little bit clearer context. I believe that the exchange between Jefferson and John Adams, once they reestablished communication with each other, and you remember that they got into political squabbles in the late 90s when Adams was president and Jefferson was running against him in the election of 1800. And for several years after that, they ceased communication with each other. But during Madison's administration, especially his second term, when Madison was reelected for a second term in 1812. And of course, we know that's the very year that the Second War with Great Britain breaks out. Jefferson and John Adams reestablished their communication, and they continued it for the balance of their lives. And of course, the interesting thing is, we know that their lives ended on exactly the same day in the year 1826, and that day was the 4th of July. Which is obviously quite one of the ironies of history, I believe. The fact of the matter is, what we are dealing with in this exchange, that runs over several years, is an interaction or a communication between two aging gentlemen whose wisdom and scholarship and depth of education is above average, well above average. In fact, quite a bit above what was standard in that day, even for the so-called educated. These guys were head and shoulders above most of their peers. And what makes this interaction between them, toward the end of their lives, extremely rich, I believe, is that in it we have these two people exchanging their views on what life is about and what meaning it has to them. In other words, what they've learned in the many years that both of them have been alive about the reason for life and what life is about and what learning was about and what politics was about and all of that, from some of the brightest, well-read people of the day. It's hard to match that in terms of value, it seems to me. And it's not a question of which one of them seems to make the most point or which one of them we tend to agree with most. It's the fact that what we have here are two guys who literally are bearing their souls to each other about some of the most internal, private, personal things. Things that many people never get an opportunity to share with anybody. Their philosophy of life and their attitude towards life and what they believe is the meaning of life and why the Creator put them here and what their major goal is in life and all the rest of it. These are issues that I think all of us as we get older think about. But most of us don't think about it in the depth that these two did. And for them to exchange it in letters and for those letters to be available to us is absolutely invaluable. And that's really what I think is so exciting about this particular exchange between these two people. With that, then, let me share this letter we got in reaction from a regular listener of our program. And she says, after this week's programs, I've thought a lot about Jefferson's letters to John Adams. The basic good in mankind, as well as a moral center, is there, I believe, in each human being at the beginning. That's how we bond. And so basically what we're experiencing here is the thoughts of somebody who listened to this and kind of agrees with the idea of the moral sense, and that this inclination or inbred gravitation, if you will, toward morality is really what human beings have in common. This is how they bond, she says. And the point I'm making, that I would make here is that that's kind of what Jefferson seemed to believe. He believed that man's equality, the very basis of equality, was the fact that everybody had this. If you were a human being, you had it from birth. And the question is whether it's cultivated, whether it's nurtured, or whether it's repressed. It seems to me what we've been talking about in our programs is the extent to which too often this is repressed for reasons that have nothing to do with the philosophy itself necessarily. And what I mean is, Jefferson himself, as far as this idea of the moral sense goes, is the victim of repression. This side of Thomas Jefferson has not been featured in all the literature, all the writing, all the conversation, all the publications about Jefferson that have happened in the 240 years or so since Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence. This aspect of it never seems to see the light of day. And what we've been looking at in our programs of late is why. What is there about this that threatens some people? Or does it? And my sense is that it does. Because it violates, it contradicts the driving ethic, if you will, behind the nature of the society that we've developed, which is based on the idea of free enterprise, of self-interest, of the idea that what really drives human beings is the desire to get ahead, the desire for success, the ability to compete with one's fellow man, and the idea that the way you measure success is in material terms. This is really the driving force behind the development of capitalism. And the whole idea that the moral sense, what Jefferson felt was the innate desire of human beings, the innate sensitivity or tendency of human beings to do good for their fellow man, is pushed into the background because it's contradictory to the elements or the definition of human nature that society would most like to promote. In other words, if you're promoting human nature as being driven by self-interest, then you've got to take this moral sense and make sure that it doesn't surface, that it doesn't get on the table, because it contradicts everything you want people to believe. To me, one of the most disturbing aspects of this is that by not exposing people to it, then you are, in many cases, denying people the knowledge that it even exists. Most people don't have any idea that this is such an important part of Jefferson. And Jefferson and Adams and their exchange back and forth, it seems to me, indicates that in the 18th century, at this time, educated people like Jefferson, like John Adams, like James Madison, the rest of them, bought into this. This is what they read. This was the moral philosophy stuff that they studied in college. And it ceased to be a factor. And as much as we claim to be students of history, we've become students of only one facet of history, and we've been encouraged to believe that the facet that we're interested, that we're exposed to, is the only one that exists. And I think that's what our programs can contribute to an end to. We've got to open up this dialogue, open up this conversation. Because it may be potentially that Jefferson has a lot more to offer us than we ever realized. So let me go on with the email. I'm commenting on the email. I almost feel like Donald Trump with his wife's speech last night, and the interview with Michael Pence on 60 Minutes. He wouldn't let the other guy talk. Trump just couldn't stop. And that's kind of the way I am with this, and I apologize for it. Anyway, our emailer goes on. I also think there's a natural curiosity to learning in each individual, and that if given the opportunity, the love of learning would be limitless. So do I. I not only believe it, but I dream about it because I want to believe it so much. I believe that true learning is not something that people run from, but something that people, once they experience it, can never get enough of it. The fact that we are having the problems we have in terms of the educational level of our own people is extremely disturbing, especially when I know, and obviously our emailer knows, that this love of learning is there if we will just cultivate it and nurture it rather than repressing it. It seems like our goal has become more in the direction of training people and telling people what we want them to believe and then trying to convince them that this is all they need to know. That seems to be our priority, not learning. And the result is that we find our people rebelling against it, our people refusing to learn it. They pretend, for purposes of their own survival, they pretend to buy it, but we know they don't. There's too much research about our education system to indicate that there's a dichotomy or a contradiction here. People have all sorts of abilities that we haven't tapped into yet. And at the same time, they run from an opportunity to come anywhere near something we call education. Because it's not, it's training. It's indoctrination. We aren't empowering people to discover truth for themselves. We're, in fact, in the business of telling them what truth is and asking them to believe it and to accept it without question. Next, our emailer says, we come to nature versus nurture and what role that plays in learning. If you want to learn, nothing can stop you, this person says, except poverty. That will kill curiosity every time. By definition, then, if poverty and hunger, the email is saying, obviously becomes the driving factor, because if that's there, then people cannot afford the luxury of what we're talking about, the love of learning. And then our emailer says, that being said, I'd like to refer to another man whom I don't necessarily always agree with, but I do admire, Sir Thomas More. And then there's this absolutely delicious quote from Thomas More's Utopia. Quote, for if you suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposes them, what else is to be concluded from this but that you first make thieves and then punish them? The implication here, of course, is that you are making a priority of controlling other people's behavior and other people's priorities. She says, I find this quote to be a timeless reminder that things change, only very slowly. We're facing the very same dilemma that's been haunting us for eons. We still haven't learned our lessons yet. In a speech given by former President Theodore Roosevelt, he spoke of the man in the arena. And this is an extensive Theodore Roosevelt quote, but I love it because I like most of the stuff you read about Theodore Roosevelt. I just find him exciting. Quote, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does not actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that this place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know victory nor defeat. And of course, the old adage that in order to grow, you've got to be in the game. You can't just be a witness to it. You've got to actually become a participant in life. We'll get to that later in our program, ironically. That's what we've come to, our emailer says. Not precisely what Mr. Roosevelt meant, but close enough for government work, one might say. We the people are gladiators, and the 1% are our crowds. The Donald said it loud and clear, I love uneducated people. I'm sure he does. We can't win because the deck's already marked, and we're all in. We're losing. And then this person says, we matter, we count. It doesn't matter what we look like. We all bleed red. We can't afford to fight each other because the commons is a symbiotic relationship and our survival depends on each other. And education is the key. I just love that email. First of all, I love the email because our programs spawned it, caused our emailer to write it. But I think what we're seeing here is an example of how important dialogue is. That we present something here at the Virtual Center, and you as an individual, if it hits you in the right place, you respond to it. And then by sharing it with our listeners, they can not only respond to what we've done here at the Virtual Center, but now to what the emailer said about it as well. And theoretically, that might generate yet another reaction. And the sum total of these reactions, one and another, driven by the information we began with, is growth and development. That's what learning is. And so one of the reasons I wanted to share this email is not only because of its content, but because of what it says about the topic we're dealing with, which is education, and the idea that what we know is based on what we already know. We can't learn new things unless we know things prior to that. Because what we learn is based on things we already know. Learning is a process. And the best teachers are the ones that understand that process and know how to introduce appropriate learning matter, appropriate content at the most appropriate times. They know when we're ready for more. They know when we're ready to handle more. And once we are exposed to the more, then what happens then is out of our hands as the teacher. And it is in the hands totally of the learner. In other words, self-learning is happening. Lifelong learning is happening. That's the process we want to instill in everybody. And I think a key point in yesterday's program about education was the fact that this idea of self-learning, this idea of learning how to learn, is really the key, not only to people reaching their personal or individual potential as learners, but this is also the key to turning around and driving economic development. Because the fact of the matter is, everybody can do this. Everybody can learn. Not obviously not to the same degree. because I think we're limited, obviously, by our genetic potential, by our genetic makeup. But the fact of the matter is, it's important that all of us be given the opportunity to at least come close to that potential. And the only way to do it for everybody is to turn education around into a direction that we're talking about here. Once that happens, once people become self-learners, they become not only employable, they become the ideal employee. They become what employers are looking for in today's world, a rapidly changing competitive world in which employees are required to move easily from one challenge to another challenge, to work closely with other people in a team kind of setting, share knowledge, share their problem-solving abilities with other people. And when you put a number of heads together, heads that are in the process of learning and growing, problems become solvable. And that's what employers are after. That's what employees must have in order to be successful competitors, if you will, for the best employment opportunities in a changing, dynamic economy. And once that happens, employers, investors will begin to gravitate to that, because that is the kind of so-called skilled workforce that employers really want. The irony is many employers say this, but they really don't know what that means. If you push them, it's a little bit difficult sometimes for them to expand on it, to articulate exactly what they mean. They know what they want. They know it when they see it. But it's difficult. In fact, it's not fair to expect them to articulate it into academic or educational terms that everybody else or other people can understand. That's what it seems educators need to do. We need to know what education requires, and we need to be in the forefront of a movement to make it happen. That's what our candidate for governor here in West Virginia said he would like to see happen. This is the way to make it happen. And I believe that we are on the cusp of a potential turnaround in this state. And I think that's what makes this whole thing not only important, but exciting. I hope that you find it equally exciting. So with that, let's go back a little bit to where we were yesterday. You'll remember that the second major issue we dealt with yesterday, after we got to how we learn and all the rest of it, is how do we educate everybody, not just the few? How do we break free of this Jeffersonian model of looking for the boy of best genius and pitting one student against another in order to find out which of them has the most potential, is seemingly most talented? Because that process not only produces winners, it produces losers. The thing about competition, it seems to me, is that while it allows losers to prevail, to show, to become visible, it also renders people losers in that particular competition. And traditionally in our society, that hasn't been a problem because there have been other places for the so-called losers to go. There have been other jobs, less demanding jobs, less skill demanding jobs, or whatever. But they're not there anymore. And increasingly, the only jobs that matter are the ones that are built on this model of transition and change. We've all heard the adage about the only thing that we can that we know for sure is that things are going to change. We've also heard the adage that those people and those societies, those communities, best able to deal with change are the ones that succeed. And those people or those communities or those economies unable to deal progressively or proactively with change are doomed to fail. You can't resist it. You can't become a Luddite because eventually that's not going to work. And the Luddites, of course, in Great Britain were the working people who saw the threat of technology and took to sabotaging the technology, the machinery, in order to try to hold off change. Ironically, isn't that what the Trump campaign is built upon? This idea of building walls, keeping out change, keeping out those people who reflect change, and trying to insulate ourselves from the world. I would suggest to you this might appeal to some people. It might even be successful in the short term. But in the long term, it can't last. It can't work because change is going to happen. And the people who will prevail are the people best equipped to embrace it, not resist it. And this approach to learning empowers every individual to embrace it and to basically bring their own potential to bear in the face of change, and to experience success, not necessarily the same level of success as everybody else, but a level of success that is far preferable than being rendered a loser or being rendered useless or being told early on in your life as a result of standardized tests that you don't seem to have any potential, that you don't seem able to deal with change, that you're a product of habit. And the only time you're comfortable is when you're doing the same things you always did in the same way you always did them. That's what we got to break and get around. So the issue then is, how do we educate everybody? How do we turn our education system 180 degrees around? And instead of making a search for talent and potential, how do we turn it into an engine that is committed to educating everybody to their own potential? The answer to this, of course, is the first thing is that we must recognize then that lifelong learning has real meaning. It's not just jargon. It means something. It's based on learning how to learn. The best teachers are the ones who can recognize this and organize their teaching, structure learning, and organize their curriculum in such a way that they are introducing new information, new concepts, challenging points of view at exactly the right times, when students are primed to handle it. And that match is the essence of good teaching. The goal is to create self-learners. by teaching people how to learn. And the way to do it is by a structured learning process, where by doing, people begin to know and learn how to learn. And once they become comfortable with learning how to learn, then their learning potential is limited only by what's within them. Example, we still have to take courses because there are so many things in life we don't know. And a particular job we have or a particular career opportunity might require that we learn about something that we don't know anything about. But imagine the difference between taking a course in something you don't know anything about now and taking a course in material that you don't know anything about when you've become a proficient self-learner. You know the questions to ask. You know what to look for. When you are introduced to a new piece of information, you are able to engage it to the point that you can go on beyond that information to the questions it raises and to the opportunities for additional learning that it opens up. You become a totally different kind of person. And as you're exposed to different experiences in life, you're able to interact with them because you can apply your engagement experiences and understanding with this particular information. You are empowered. You don't need a teacher anymore. You have become your own teacher. And no matter what kind of changes we're confronted with, no matter what kind of changes in skill demands seem to come into being in the workplace, in a changing workplace, we're ready for them. We know how to handle them. That's the only way that you can prepare people for jobs that don't even exist yet. How do you prepare people for jobs when we don't even know what those jobs are going to be? That's been the challenge to educators for as long as I can remember, and a long time before. If change is happening, then can we continue to educate people as if it's not? Because that's what we do. And the answer is no. So therefore, it seems to me, one of the things we've learned then is that lifelong learning is a real thing. It's not just language. It's not just jargon. It doesn't just sound good. It's real. The second thing we know is that a dedicated teacher is critical, because it's a dedicated teacher that creates the kind of learning opportunities that allow self-learning to develop. So we're not talking about replacing teachers. We're talking about creating an attitude or a view towards teaching which really allows us to identify the best teachers. Once you know that this is what learning is about, then it becomes relatively easy to find the best teachers and to reward them appropriately. And the fact of the matter is, if you've got dedicated people in our classrooms who love young people and want to do good and want to contribute and want to help people find themselves, if you will, then you've got a ready-made audience for training in this approach to learning. Think about what these teachers can become. They can go from good teachers to great teachers. And there's no amount of money that we can pay them that'll be worth the good that they are able to bring to their classrooms. Many people, I'm one, criticize the way we distribute income in our society, where we have these fabulous multi-million-dollar contracts being signed by professional athletes. and we expect our teachers to live on starvation wages. We keep cutting back budgets, which forces the best teachers, everybody doesn't do this, only the committed ones, to buy their own materials, to invest their own resources in what they believe that their students need in order to learn. Look at the quality of people we've got to work with. All we need to do is introduce them to how this works, it seems to me. The answer, then, is that it really addresses the kind of elusive questions that have baffled educators for generations. How do we prepare students for the 21st century workplace? How do we equip them with the skills demanded for jobs that are in demand when we know that these jobs will likely be gone before the people we're training are prepared to compete for them? How do we predict the skills that will be needed in jobs that don't even exist yet? How do we equip students for challenges that we can't even define because we don't know what they are? The answer is we must begin to empower our students, our people, to become self-learners and to be able to learn by doing. Learning how to learn is the answer. By focusing on education that teaches students how to learn, we equip them for change. We enable them to move easily from one challenge to the next challenge. We stimulate research skills. We promote team building in order to solve problems. These are the skills that our employers are demanding in a more competitive global economy. More importantly, this is an education that every student, not just a few students, can master. And let me read what I've written here because this is my own, I don't want to mess this up. No longer can we continue to focus our K through 12 dollars and our ever scarce support services on only the best students. We're well beyond the luxury of using our schools as competitive laboratories to identify what Jefferson termed the boy of best genius. We can't continue to write off the bulk of our students as just average, to classify them as residue, as Jefferson suggested. That's education for a time long gone, when the many were educated to look to their betters for guidance. Presumably, we live in a different world today. It's time we upgraded our education system to meet the challenges of the world we live in, not the world that we used to live in. Our ability to compete effectively in that world demands it. And that pretty well gets us to where we were after yesterday's program. It seems to me that we addressed those two questions yesterday about education and self-learning and about turning our education system from one directed towards educating only the few to educating everybody. It seems to me the next challenge, part of this idea of turning education into an economic engine for economic development, it seems to me this requires that we leave the confines of the K through 12 system and we look at our higher education system. Two things I want to say before we begin to deal with this. The first thing is that we're talking about our higher education system in the present, not in the future. And let me explain what I think I mean by that. If we actually begin to implement the things that we've been talking about yesterday and just now over the last 45 minutes or so, if we actually do that and find that indeed it does work, then by definition, that's going to revitalize our higher education system, because it's going to bring accomplished learners into the higher education classrooms. College and university learning will no longer be driven by lectures, will no longer be driven by the delivery of information. Because one of the things we'll know for absolute surety is that education is not the content. Education is what happens within the students once they engage that content. So in a sense, we are creating the groundwork for a revolution in higher education, because our instructors, our faculty members, our professors who have expertise in a particular discipline, a particular subject matter, will be able to introduce that content to us, because then the us will be comprised predominantly of self-learners. People who can take the content, massage it, chew on it, understand it, be able to spot the key questions surrounding it, and more important, be able to take that new knowledge that we develop from our own self-learning and apply it to different new situations so that we can continue to learn more. In other words, new knowledge is the product of our engagement with old knowledge. And understanding, really learning it, involves the ability to apply it. And when we can apply it, we can learn more new things from it. But all of it requires the basis or the grounding. So when we get into higher education, we're not talking about the future, because the next generation and the generation after that will be comprised mostly of self-learners, of lifelong learners, if the reforms we've already talked about are implemented. So when we talk about higher education, we're talking about higher education right now. What can we do in the short term? While this revolution is going on in K through 12 education, what do we do in higher education? More specifically, how do we move educators, higher education, off the dime that they are grounded to, which is their quest for the best students? We know that colleges and universities compete with each other for the best students, the most qualified students. We do it with scholarships. We do it with grants. We do it with all kinds of academic jobs, career-focused jobs. We try to find as many different perks as possible in order to attract the most qualified students to our institution, as opposed to others that are after them. It's the same thing that goes on when colleges and universities' athletic programs compete for the best athletes. If you have ever watched, as I have, the movie Blind Side, about the football player, Michael Orr, who was picked from the streets of inner city Memphis and ultimately educated to the point that he becomes an accomplished football player that's recruited by most institutions in the Southeastern Conference and eventually ends up going to the University of Mississippi, because that's the home campus or the home institution, if you will, of the people who rescued him. I've seen it movie numerous times. It's won all kinds of awards. Sandra Bullock won an award for her starring role in it. That's what we're talking about, competing for students. That's what our education systems do. That's why they hire recruiters in the admissions office. And that's why these recruitment budgets grow bigger and bigger as institutions need more recruiters in order to go further and further in order to recruit capable students. The question I raise is, what about the students, what about the adults who are already here? What about the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of underserved, uneducated adults who are deficient in skills they need to become employed, who do not have access to the American dream at all, and yet we have these institutions of higher education that are funded from public tax money, whose job is to educate the communities they're in, but who consciously overlook or ignore the bulk of the people in their regions who need their services most. That's the model that we've got to turn around. And it's tied to the same model that we talked about in K through 12 education. Namely, we have got to stop educating for the few. We've got to commit ourselves to the need to educate everybody. We've got to begin to believe, not just do it because everybody says it, but we actually absolutely must begin to believe that there is learning potential in everybody. Everybody can become a self-learner. Everybody can learn more than they know now if we show them how to do it. So our colleges and universities need to become places where lifelong learning, self-learning, is introduced into the process so that every adult, except those who obviously are suffering from some sort of learning disability which makes it impossible for them to do this. The vast majority of adults are not suffering from learning disabilities. They may be suffering from drug addiction or alcohol addiction because they're so depressed and frustrated. But most of them can learn, and they can learn enough to teach themselves. They can be challenged by new situations and be able to master those situations, provided that they don't take on challenges that are above their own potential to handle. What that means is we've got to flip our priorities in higher education 180 degrees. We've got to turn the process from a search for talent into an education process for everybody, so that people who are currently out there in situations of endless lifelong unemployment can be given an opportunity to turn that around. Theoretically, this is short term. So let me go to text, to the way I've put this into writing. Our colleges and universities continue to compete for the best prepared students. Academic programs, even in community colleges, are geared principally to young high school graduates who show the greatest potential. Large segments of our adult population, unskilled, undereducated, unnoticed by college recruiters, with little hope for the future, are summarily written off as uneducable by institutions unwilling to risk accreditation, financial aid eligibility for their real students, academic standards, the flow of research dollars and foundation grants, etc. In other words, there are too many things built into our higher education system that prohibit institutions from addressing the needs of these people who need it most. We have got to change that. We have got to turn that around. Yesterday, I was addressing here the idea that here in West Virginia, we have the most public colleges and universities per capita of any state in the union. Yet they're all losing enrollment with a couple of exceptions. But the fact of the matter is, if everybody in West Virginia who needed higher education services was actually getting them, our colleges would be bursting at the seams. They wouldn't be able to handle the number of students they have. But for reasons that none of us have really thought about before, they can't afford to do this. They can't risk academic standards. They can't risk their reputations as high-quality institutions because that's what they use to recruit qualified students, is their reputation. Being able to point to particular examples of what their graduates have been able to accomplish, because you're sending message to potential recruits that if you go here and get a degree from here, you too can be in demand in the world, in the professional world. So the fact of the matter is, we've got to find a way to enable institutions to deal with this challenge. The challenge of the unserved, unnoticed, underdeveloped, uneducated adult population in all of our states. I would guess that it's huge. In some places, it's higher than it is in others. Here in West Virginia, we just received data over the last year that indicated that for the first time, there are more adult working age populations in West Virginia who aren't working than there are who are. In other words, the number of unemployed adults in our state has topped 50% of the working age population. No economy can have a chance with that kind of human baggage. Because by definition, as skill demands get more and more stringent, more and more competitive, that number is only going to grow unless we do something to change it. And what that means is, instead of these people becoming taxpayers and contributors to society's growth and expansion, they become users, they become takers. They become people who need subsidies for health insurance for their children, for food and clothing, for housing, for utilities bills. And as that number continues to grow, it becomes an unbearable burden for those who are working. Because by definition, taxes have to keep going up and up and up because the need gets greater. I know here in our local situation, the resources of organizations like Salvation Army and our United Way are stretched to the max and then some. They can't handle the need. We opened a kitchen, a soup kitchen here, that provided food here locally about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a couple of years more, maybe 5 years ago. When it was first created, it was open 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then within a year and a half, they began to have such a huge clientele that they were required to open 5 days a week. Then people began to look at weekends. Now they're open 6 days a week. Not only that, but when you look at the people who are being fed on a day-to-day basis, a larger and larger percentage of these people for free lunches are children. No economy can continue to sustain this kind of a demand on its resources. This is the issue that we have to turn around. We must find ways to direct educational and training services to this invisible, all but forgotten adult population. There's more to a good job than income. We know that. Rewarding work, a job that promises a positive contribution to one's community, is critical to one's self-respect. The Pope told us that in his encyclical. We can't afford to continue to make economic decisions in our society based on bottom line economic numbers as a whole, totally. We can't continue to dismiss more and more of our people as unemployable, as uneducable, as useless, as non-contributors to the communities they live in. We can't continue to do that. We're destroying their self-respect. We're destroying their self-image. We're driving many of them to alcohol and drugs and opiate use. We're increasing crime. Our prisons and jails are bulging at the seams from overpopulation. And the demands are there from most states to build more prisons. Now the pressure for judicial or civil justice reform is to find a way to release the nonviolent in order to reserve prison space for the violent offenders. It seems to me that if we began to deal substantively and positively with this issue, many of these problems, like drugs and alcohol and all the rest of it, would disappear. It's idealistic, I know, but I've talked to people that really believe it. I'm one of them. I really believe that what we see is a drug problem, a prescription drug problem that is burying our societies, our communities, our state budgets, will begin to take care of itself once we give people an opportunity to work and become self-sufficient, to take care of their families, contribute to their communities, and derive the psychological benefits of self-respect that go with work. Work is not just a salary. It's not just a paycheck. It's psychological well-being. And we have allowed ourselves to fall into a trap, into a cultural trap, which is inadvertently, and I say that because we're not doing this intentionally, but unwittingly, through no fault of our own, we are deriving people of the opportunity to cultivate and nurture their own self-respect. We can't continue to do that, it seems to me. There's one additional issue. I don't know that we'll have time to complete it today, but if we don't, we can return to it tomorrow because it's a big one. And I will say going in that this program the virtual center, is really a living example of what I'm talking about here. And that's the productive use of technology in the 21st century. And what I mean by the productive use of technology is the use of technology in the classroom. I'm not talking about the workplace, because it's going to be there. Technology has long been, and will continue to be in the workplace. Robots completing or satisfying job requirements by turning to technology rather than people, and not recognizing that that has bottom line benefits, but that in effect it is a social disaster. What we're talking about here specifically is technology in the classroom. The extent to which technology gives us opportunities for learning and expanding learning and improving learning that wouldn't be there without it. Let me go back a little bit. Many of you will remember, I do, and I think this is obviously age-related, but do you remember when television first appeared in the 1950s and early 60s? Many people believed that television was going to revolutionize education because it made it possible to show people, to let youngsters, let students see what it is we were trying to teach them. Instead of just hearing it from a teacher in a lecture, now they could actually see it by looking at it on television. And if we could bury that knowledge or that learning in programs that were entertaining, then they could watch television and actually begin to learn from it, and thereby television would revolutionize education in America. Well, we've heard the same thing about the internet. We continue to hear the same things about how the internet gives us the potential to revolutionize education. But I would suggest to you, like television, it's not working the way it's supposed to. It's not happening. And I think part of the reason it's not happening is because of what we've covered so far. The fact of the matter is, like television, the internet exceeded its ability to deliver. The hope, the promise, far exceeded the internet's ability to deliver, just as did television. Like television, it came with more negatives than it did positives. The major one being its inclination to redefine education to coincide with its strengths. Remember Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s. He warned that the danger of television was the danger that the medium would become the message. And that became a very famous phrase from Marshall McLuhan. The medium becomes the message. It's important to reflect for a moment on what that means. That means that the ability to deliver becomes education. In other words, because technology gives us the capability of delivering information in ways and in quantities that we were never able to do before, that it will revolutionize education only if you define education as the information delivered. But it's not. And we already know that. Because delivery of content over great distances on the internet was now possible, the inclination to define the content delivered as education itself was irresistible. And in recent years, and it's still continuing today, once the medium and the message became the same thing, once people didn't distinguish anymore between the medium and the message, once most people were convinced that the delivery of information was education, then our educational success was guaranteed. In other words, once we began to define education as something that it wasn't, something that matched education, then we couldn't miss. Because the internet, just like television, gave us the potential to deliver information in distances and degrees and quantities that we never had before. Because the delivery of information over great distances was now possible, the inclination to define the content delivered as education became irresistible. We couldn't miss. We couldn't fail. And once the two became synonymous, once what was delivered was defined as education, once that happened, then technology came to the rescue and made it even better. With the development of programs like Microsoft Word, like PowerPoint, like Publisher, like Photoshop, these software programs polished up content delivery and made it irresistible, made it interesting, made it funny, made it exciting. And the reality is that once that happened, the quality of classroom performance seemed not to go up, but to go down, to recede to what the technology allowed. In other words, PowerPoint, Photoshop, Publisher, and these other software programs so gussied up the delivery of information that it reinforced the idea that the content being delivered was education. And the fact of the matter is, once that happened, then true educational quality, the real stuff, was forced into the background. All right. Audio enhanced projection, snippets of live videos, elements of news broadcasts. These and other enhancements began to dominate America's classrooms. Think about this one. The teachers, the instructors, with the most whiz-bang delivery motifs, took center stage as the nation's best teachers. The best teachers were the ones able to integrate the newest technology into their teaching. Their classes became exciting. Their classes became comical and funny and entertaining. But the fact of the matter is, the more of that happened, the less real learning went on. And so the fact of the matter is, as educational budgets continue to expand in order to afford the latest technology, the quality of instruction continued to go down and down and down. Test scores got worse. Standardized tests proved that our students weren't becoming any brighter, that they seemed to know less. And increasingly, what we were doing was turning the day-to-day experience of going to school into a more entertaining exercise. But as far as people's ability to learn anything, it wasn't happening. We were failing on all fronts. Distance learning. I've called it the Internet's most visible contribution to education. The ability to take classes, individual courses, and entire academic programs and put them on every kitchen table in America became the future of education. It continues to be. How many institutions do you see advertised on television where you can register for entire programs and get your degree without ever leaving home? The fact of the matter is, in order to do that, institutions, by definition, have had to redefine education into the content. The delivery of online instruction of entire courses mandates that testing be focused principally on the content delivered. And so it's possible for bright students on the other end to complete entire academic courses in 3 or 4 weekends, in a few weeks. In other words, the ones that are most motivated, that are most eager to get through fast, are able to go through the hoops, complete the assignments, check off the results, pass the course, and go on to the next one. And it's possible for the same student to take 6, 7, 8, 9 courses in an 8 to 10 week period. What they come out with is a credential which says that they completed all these classes. But the fact of the matter is, whether they learned anything from the experience is not only questionable, it's unlikely. What they did learn is how to become more proficient in test taking, how to play the system, how to work it to their own advantage. The irony of this, to me, seems to be that while we seem to be achieving more and more success, we were driving the nails deeper and deeper and deeper into our educational coffin. We were becoming further and further removed from what we have defined as real education. We've got 1 minute left in today's program. We'll return to this topic tomorrow. I hope you'll join us. This is important. Thank you for listening to the Virtual Center on this Tuesday, the 18th day of July. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening, and that you can join us again tomorrow. Thank you so very, very much. Have a good day.